We're going on an EV road trip adventure today as I talk with Richard Laxton, who is travelling around Australia in his Tesla Model 3. Along with big driving trips, Richard's interests include renewable energy, space, and being Car Loop's chief evangelist. Hello, Richard.
Adrian, how are you?
Good to speak to you. Yeah, I guess first up I'll ask you, where are you?
I'm currently in Penong Caravan Park in South Australia, which is on the eastern end of the Nullarbor Plain. This morning I have crossed the Nullarbor from a place called Border Village, which is on the border between Western Australia and South Australia. So I woke up in a different time zone and then immediately jumped into a time zone that was an hour and 45 minutes different. So it's been a crazy day.
Yeah, even I'm finding it confusing because you were 5 hours different to here, and then you weren't 5 minutes later, kind of thing.
It's a very strange. It's an odd time zone that's supposed to split the difference between South Australia and Western Australia. But when there's daylight savings in South Australia, instead of being 45 minutes, it's an hour and 45 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
It's all very weird.
Yeah. I guess. Sorry.
Traffic jam on the Nullarbor. There were three Teslas charging today, or trying to charge from one three-phase socket. So we can talk about the problems of the lack of infrastructure later on. But,
yeah. So how long have you been travelling for?
So we didn't taking it easy. I think we're probably day 55 because we were actually properly, taking our time to stop at certain places. We stopped at Cairns and Exmouth and just spending a few days here and there to relax. But we're 16,630 kilometres at the moment into the trip.
And where did you start from?
Melbourne.
And you're going that way?
Counterclockwise.
Yeah.
So we're only about 1,500 kilometres to home, something like that, or 1,600 maybe.
I guess next question would be why the big drive?
Well, I kind of always wanted to do. I mean, it's a classic thing, right? You do a lap of the country, and I've done bits of it in the past, but never really had a chance. And I just figured that now is the time. At the moment, it's at a very transitional time, particularly for electric vehicles here. Infrastructure is finally starting to come in on this trip, particularly in Western Australia. They've been building out their Western Australian EV network, and it's gone from having no DC chargers whatsoever between Darwin and Perth to having like half a dozen, like one every, 500 Ks or so. And probably by the end of next year, there'll be a charger every roughly 150 kilometres around the entire coast of Western Australia, which is a long coast, right?
You've chosen a big country to go around for your tour.
True, it does have a lot of coastline. That is true, and of course, some of the cities like Darwin is not actually on the main route around. It's off to one side, so you have to go to Darwin. But even there, Darwin has got 3 EV, like high speed EV chargers now, and didn't have any last year. So things are finally starting to move very quickly.
It's taken a while, though, hasn't it, in Australia?
Definitely. Look, we lost 10 years with a government that was just anti any progress at all in any way, shape, or form. So we lost 10 years in progress for renewable energy. We lost 10 years for progress in electric vehicle infrastructure and various other things. The state governments did what they could, but without sort of proper federal support, it does make it very difficult. I mean, you guys have got it easy in some respects in New Zealand, and you don't have that 3 levels. You've got only 2 levels of government, as I understand.
Just with your Tesla Model 3, did you already have that and you just sort of went, I'm just going to go with this car, or was it a specific reason you've got the Tesla?
Yeah, so I got this car in December of 2019. And in the first 4 weeks of ownership, I'd done 9,000 kilometres on it. And then, COVID kind of slammed down on top of us, and I did very little for quite some time, because Melbourne, when we locked down, had 2 really long lockdowns and things like that. And then last year I ended up going up to Uluru, to Ayers Rock in the middle of the country, which is like an 8,000 k round trip, and the car went pretty well for that. That was my first real experience of outback touring. I'd bought all the gear in preparation for doing this sort of stuff, like, even before I got the car. As you do, you get excited, when you get in your EV. But yeah, so I had this car already. I did actually look at potentially getting something, from one of the manufacturers to sort of sponsor the trip if they wanted to be the first of their car, but unfortunately it didn't work out. Started a bit too late. So, and I love this car. It's a great road tripping car.
How do you prepare
Except
for
for the wheel.
How do you prepare for outback travel then? What do you have to?
Well, the main thing is there's two main things. First, carry a spare, because spare tires, and I'll tell you a story about that a little bit later. But there's always a chance you're going to lose a tire out here. The roads aren't always perfect, and when you're running 20-inch rims, with 35 profile tires like this is a Model 3 Performance, so it's not got the most rough road friendly tires and wheels in the entire universe. There's always a chance you're going to crack a rim as well as losing a tire, so you have to have a full set. And the only other thing is getting the right charging gear. So I've got a portable EVSE that has a 32 amp 3-phase, a 20 amp 3-phase, and 10 and 15 amp single phase tails. So I can basically charge from pretty much anything that I might encounter on this trip. And I have used all 4 of those tails on this trip. On the 20 amps, the rarest, but the 32 amps 3-phase is the most common one that we have around here for charging, and that can charge the car in about 4.5 hours or 5 hours. So it's pretty good.
Have you run out of power yet, or has always been somewhere to?
I've never run out of energy in my EV at all. But you get close. I mean, you just have to manage it. So there are hypermiling techniques that you can use to get distances. I mean, this, as I said, this is the Model 3 Performance, which means it's not the best car for this sort of trip. The tires are too sticky. The wheels are more about getting air out of it and cooling brakes than being super aerodynamic. So, I struggle. I don't like to go more than 400 kilometers, let's say, on a charge from 100%. So that means I need to watch out for things like headwinds, for example. They can kill you. But the main thing is, like, if you're not going to make it, you slow down. At 140 k's an hour, the car will drain itself empty in 200 k's. But at 80 k's an hour, I can make 400 k's at a stretch. So it's a big difference. And the other thing is, now that I've got a crack in my windscreen and I don't care about it anymore, there's slipstreaming, of course, is drafting behind caravans, or just right now here, we were drafting behind a road train, like a three car road train that was doing just under 100 k's an hour. So that was perfect. And our kind of estimated energy remaining when we got here went from sort of 0 to 12%. So it makes a huge difference. You can save like 20% by slowing down and hypermiling, behind a big truck. Just be aware that if they dodge, you've got to dodge, because you can't see what the hell's coming up in front of you.
Being a Tesla owner, have you learned any sort of thing new about the Tesla for this sort of travel? Or what?
Something was confirmed that I had suspected for a while, actually, and that's that the wheel alignment, the toe in particular, is not stable on these cars when you get a bit of bumpy action. So coming out of Broome, the road, which is in the northwest of WA, the road is pretty heavily cut up from a cyclone they had last year, and they're doing their best to fix it. But, there's hundreds of kilometres of road that's seriously, seriously smashed up. And, you can't dodge all of the potholes. And so I must have hit something, and it misaligned the rear toe. I didn't realise. I did notice that my energy consumption went up slightly. That could be wind, it could be terrain, it could be lots of different things. And then I was on the Northwest Cape, which is near a place called Exmouth, which is like a kind of, actually it's a military base. Let's be honest. It started out as a military base. One of the things that put Australia on the target list for the Cold War many years ago, back when I was a kid. I'd never been here before, but I remember the protests about it when I was a kid. Anyway, but I was heading out of the backside of Northwest Cape, and one of my tyres went flat. I was like, what the hell? So I popped out, changed the tyre, which, by the way, in a Model 3 Performance is quite difficult. I had to make a custom-made jack because the car is very low, and so I had to make a custom jack that would actually be able to work lift the car. But, tyre change, I noticed that the entire inside rim was completely shredded, down to the wires. And then I looked at the other side, and it was also completely shredded. So I was like, oh, this is not going to last long. This is not going to get me where I need to be. I am 1,000 kilometres north of Perth. There is no civilization really where you can buy the sort of tyres that you get on this car between them. So I drove back to Exmouth. And I happened to get in contact with a guy who reached out to me on Twitter and said, hey, are you in Exmouth still? Do you want to drive a Tesla Model Y for me down to Carnarvon? And I was like, sure. So basically, I had this other Tesla Model Y, and my partner was driving the 3, and I was driving the Tesla Model Y down. And we got to within about 80 kilometres of Carnarvon, and the second tyre went flat. So I actually put a tyre from the Tesla Model Y, which is significantly bigger, on the back of this car, and then we drove into Carnarvon, got a wheel alignment done the next day, and headed down a little bit further to a place called Billabong Homestead. And this is where probably the greatest thing that I learned on this entire trip actually happened, and that is how above and beyond bonkers the WA Tesla community is, EV community in general. A guy by the name of Rob Dean, who, he's a local Tesla Owners Club of WA guy and an AVA guy. He reached out to me and said, he's giving me some advice about where I might be able to find some tires and things like that. But what he eventually did was say, look, I'll sort some wheels out for you. And he was going to bring one wheel up, but then he was speaking to this guy named John Edwards, who is the person who created a very interesting charging system, which I'll talk to you about later on. And he borrowed 2 wheels from him and drove it 650 kilometres north to where I was staying. And we changed the tyres over. Then he stayed the night, and then he went back. So he drove 1,300 kilometre round trip to drop some wheels off to me.
I wouldn't be doing that. No.
Yeah, I would, but I wouldn't need it, because that's the sort of crazy thing I would do as well, right? But in Victoria, it's much more compact. There's a lot. It's probably closer to New Zealand in terms of you can't be as far away from stuff. But in WA, the level of self-sufficiency that the people have here is on the far side of insane. But it's brilliant, and he's a top bloke. Yeah. He even invited me to the Tesla Owners Club of WA meeting, when I got back to Perth, and had a nice feed down at the biggest pub in the Southern Hemisphere. It was amazing. But yeah, that's probably the thing I learned most about Teslas and the community, that there are really, really, really amazing top people out there.
Did you notice any difference between the Y and your Model 3?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the Y was a short range rear wheel drive. So actually, because they can be easily charged for 100% because of the LFP battery, the range is actually pretty close. My 4-year-old Model 3 and this brand new Model Y short range or standard range. So that was kind of cool. but it's a nice thing to drive. I drove one for 10,000 kilometers in the United States when I went there for the Starship launch in April, so I already knew how they drove. But the biggest thing was being them. It's a bit floaty. They're a little bit floaty. The hit point's slightly higher. They're more affected by wind. Like when you pass a road train, you don't have road trains in New Zealand, right? Yeah. Imagine a truck that's 56 meters long and has like 80 wheels. That's basically what you're looking at. They move a lot of air, and so when you pass one in the Model Y, it kicks a lot more. Model 3 is a lot more stable in that respect, but it's they drive very similarly. Of course, not as powerful because it didn't have nearly as much motor in it, but yeah, they're a relaxing thing to drive.
Yeah, just maybe the charging, because I'm going to mention that we're talking about the charging style, the oil charging. You mentioned in the notes.
Yeah, that's right. So John Edwards is the guy who lent me the wheels. He built this thing for remote use, which is completely portable, self-contained charger. That's effectively I think it's a 50 or a 60 kVA generator and a tritium V-fill 50 kilowatt charger mounted to a skid. So you can basically just pick it up with a forklift and bung it on a truck and move it somewhere else. Oh, and the other side of the skid is a couple of 44-gallon drums with a kind of filtration mechanism built into them. And effectively the thing, it starts on diesel for probably like the first 30 seconds because it's very hard to start it on waste vegetable oil. But then after that, it runs on pure waste vegetable oil, basically chip fat, just filtered chip fat, not biodiesel, literally filtered chip fat. And, out in the middle of bloody nowhere, I'm getting a 40, 43, 45, 46 kilowatt charge. And so that's one of them currently sitting in a place called Kaiguna, which is on the western end of the Nullarbor. So, that was brilliant. And apparently, talking to John, it's actually getting very close to paying for itself already, considering the cost of it. Because there's so many people across the Nullarbor now, it's no longer something that's considered to be like really, really hard or impossible or difficult. And so, yeah, I saw a guy in a Cupra Born was crossing the Nullarbor, and there's people in MG4s and MGZSs, and even people someone in a Leaf crossed it a couple of times too. So mostly Teslas, of course.
Yeah. Gee, a Leaf, that's pretty.
Yeah, a Leaf. Yeah.
It's pretty brave.
But someone drove a Leaf around Australia. Back in the old days, someone drove a Leaf around Australia, and it just means you've got to really take your time, and you've got to charge at every caravan park. But the thing about electricity is it is everywhere, right? And this is one thing, even places that don't have ability to buy fuel, they'll still have electricity, whether it's solar or it's diesel or whatever. So it kind of makes, I like to describe an EV as the ultimate flex fuel vehicle. On this trip, I have charged from coal and diesel and chip fat and natural gas, but I've also charged from solar, wind, and hydroelectric power. With most of the power I've been buying has been fairly green, except for the stuff across the Nullarbor. So, it's something you just can't have with any other, like an internal combustion engine vehicle. You don't have that flexibility because you've got to have highly processed hydrocarbons of the particular grade that you need. And that's it. Right? That's all you can drive on.
And Australia is sort of increasing their solar levels, this more sustainable. I guess.
Yeah, so we've got the highest penetration of rooftop solar in the world, which is not surprising considering we're a pretty sunny old country.
Yeah.
But the number of larger scale solar installations has been really increasing. So, for example, one of the roadhouses that I was at, I was wandering around at night, and I came across this solar array, and I was like counting it out. I got 500 watt panels. Wow! And I sort of was counting this row of panels. I had 90 panels in. I was like, wow, that's incredible. 45 kilowatts. Then I scrolled sideways a little bit as I was walking along, and there were 10 rows of this. So this tiny roadhouse in the middle of nowhere called Berkeley Homestead has a 450 kilowatt ground-mounted solar array with a large battery building as well built into it. And there's a number of places where people are setting. I guess I'm rolling in with towing a Vitara. Yes, so there are people setting up remote stuff purely for EV charging. So Horizon Power and the NRMA in particular have both created off-grid remote area power systems just to run DC chargers, because there's a lot of Australia. I don't know about how it is in New Zealand, but there is a lot of Australia that is not on any kind of electricity grid. For example, in South Australia, I am at the limit of the electricity grid right now in this place called Penong. There is, 500 or 600 kilometres or something like that of South Australia left, before you get to the border, and none of that has grid. Probably at least 50% about 50% probably of my trip has been either on small isolated grids or on no grid at all. And it's not likely to change anytime soon. So these solar power systems are becoming more and more critical. But fortunately, batteries are reducing in cost, so these systems get cheaper and cheaper. And what else is increasing in cost? Diesel. So the cost of, when your diesel bill annually is $250,000 or $300,000, it becomes easier to create a business case to put a solar and battery system in there, because even if it's only gets rid of 90% of that demand, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. And all these roadhouses are like that. Every one of the roadhouses in Australia that is on a remote area power system will have a fuel bill in the order of $250,000 or $300,000, even $500,000.
So the more rural areas are embracing the change from, say, petrol to electric, or is it still a bit
stationary power generation? Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, the number of people putting big solar systems in. Actual transition to electric vehicles, possibly less so, but which is reasonable, because the distances we are talking about are very, very large. There are a lot of people in Australia who live in places where a round trip to the shops is 800 or 1,000 kilometres. You don't want that to take 2 days. But at the same time, the number of DC chargers is rapidly increasing on a lot of the really major routes. So, an electric vehicle becomes more and more practical out in the bush. And of course, the fact is you can actually fuel it wherever you are. So if you've got a remote house with solar, you can fuel your EV and drive it around the farm as much as you like, and never be worried about running out of fuel. You don't have to, truck diesel into your house all the time. So, the transition will happen for those guys. But we need a few different vehicles. We're missing the utes and the 4-wheel drives that people out there drive, or out here drive. They don't exist on the market yet.
Yeah, I think BYD's bringing out a ute soon, aren't they?
Yes, so BYD and LDV. LDV had the ET60, right, which was not really a compelling ute. It was a bit of a toe in the water just to see whether people would, do anything along those lines. But it's now they're bringing out a bespoke, proper twin cab ute set up. So hopefully by next year, I'm hoping to do this trip again with Riz at some point, driving these new generation of EV utes, and maybe like a Kia EV9 or something as something a little bit more rough and tumble than say Tesla Model 3 Performance.
Did you do much research before you started your trip, or is it just being?
Well, I mean, I guess I mean, some of it would have been the trip that I did last year to Uluru, which was an 8,000k round trip. That was, I knew was going to be, to get to Port Augusta from Melbourne, which is about 1,100 k's, and going via the Hornsdale Power Reserve, by the way, that giant battery that made headlines in Australia. That's a one-day trip, as far as I'm concerned. But then from there up to Uluru is like, it's another 2,000 kilometres or something like that, and that's all off-grid stuff, road passes and stuff like that. So before I did that trip, I was actually struggling to find a three-phase power socket in Melbourne that I could access, to be honest. I wanted to test all my equipment. I'd never had a chance to test it except on single phase. And so eventually my daughter was working at a environmental consulting firm, and they happened to have one in the car park. So I went in, tested it, verified that everything worked. Because you want to make sure all your stuff works. And the other thing is, researching where the chargers are and what they're like. And while it's a terrible platform, PlugShare is in Australia the one that everybody uses. So there's a lot of looking at the route, looking at what power is available, ranging from 10 amp sockets up to actual DC chargers, reading the actual comments about them. Oh, that's not really there anymore, or the person who runs this place hates EVs and will like spit on you if you come and talk to them, or whatever. And as I found out in some place in WA, EV drivers, some of them, particularly some of the early Tesla drivers, are really badly behaved, and they've actually alienated some of these remote areas because they were coming in, they were sort of charging without telling anybody, or they were not actually paying their way properly for access to these resources. Because I see it as a remote area EV driver, I see it as my kind of duty to try and make the business case for these places to maintain all of the gear that they have as strong as possible. I want them to go, what, we're making money out of this at whatever we're charging for electricity. We can take a clip on it. It's more expensive. It's earning us more than we're paying. So let's make more of this. And that's actually something that's happened with the Billabong Homestead in Western Australia, 650 k's north of Perth. They got a Tesla destination charger many years ago, and they had a 3-phase socket there as well. And the local Tesla people have been going back and forth there for years. And now they're working with Horizon Power to get a giant remote area solar power system with batteries and a 150 kilowatt twin plug chem power unit out in the front yard, which they will own in 5 years, like some sort of rent to own program, all because EV drivers were nice to them, and provided and they don't charge for them their charging either. They literally, if you're not staying there, they do charge you $10, but otherwise it's free if you're actually staying there. Because what they realize, and what a lot of these places are realizing, you're stuck there for a couple of hours. You're going to have a big meal. You're going to go to buy a bunch of drinks. You're going to do all these sorts of things, or you're going to stay overnight. People like who are EV travelers, they will stay at the places that allow them to charge. So it becomes a business proposition for them, and that's what's in the best interest of the EV drivers of Australia, or any country really, to make sure that the people who are hosting EV chargers have a viable business out of it, because that means it will continue to work and be happy forever.
That's a good point. Maybe we'll just do a quick little tourism side thing. Any sort of any special place that's a great tourist attraction? One thing that
I really loved was Ningaloo Reef. So the Great Barrier Reef in Australia gets a lot of press, right? That's on the Queensland coast, 2,000 k's of coral reefs. The problem is that Queensland is incredibly heavily populated, and it is a lot of agriculture and a lot of rainfall and various things, and so the reef is not in fantastic shape. There's a lot of agricultural runoff that pretty much destroys how the reef works. Ningaloo Reef is about 1,000 k's long and is just off the West Australian coast near this town Exmouth I was telling you about before. And it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. The quality of the coral, the levels of like fish populations are just absolutely beautiful. So yeah, snorkeling around Ningaloo Reef and also the aquarium that the local council there runs. It's just spectacular. So I'll say, yeah, Ningaloo Reef. There you
Okay.
go.
Yeah. And you got any? Once you finish this trip, you got any other plans to keep doing long trips, or is
There's always depends on how you define a long trip. You know,
oh,
I
different to
I I, I
me?
don't anything. Sorry,
It's
what do you
bit
call a
different.
long trip?
Anything over half an hour? I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
you.
I've got a lot of got a lot of like EVs I need to retest, um, but that'll be like day trips. Any long trips? I don't know. I'll probably drive up to like Sydney or Queensland just for the hell of it. I may have to come back to Adelaide because I'm cutting my trip short a little bit here. But anything. I mean, kind of anything less than 1,000 k's is a very short trip. It has to be longer than 1,000 k's before you even think about it as a middle length trip. It's not to drive. We're not completely normal, let's just say.
Yeah.
We like to drive.
So when you get back, when you finally finish, how long will that have taken, and how many Ks would you have done?
So, like I said, I'm about 16,630 now. And I think I looked at it this morning. I'm about 1,800 kilometers from here to home. So it works out to be, I guess, just over 18,000 kilometers all up. Um, and yeah, those last 1,800 k's are going to take me the next 2 days. So I'll be home at the end of Sunday.
Oh yeah. So how long will that? What's the total trip time then? You would have
Yeah, so 58 days maybe.
58 days.
Yeah, which is, I mean, like I said, I'm taking my time. There's a gentleman by the name of Harold Murphy who is pretty big on sort of Twitter in the sort of long distance driving space. He's done 3 laps of Australia in various Teslas so far because he's a mad lad, and he's actually, in fact, he may have already left. He's trying for a 12-day lap of Australia.
Heck.
Yeah, it won't be the 18,000 kilometre lap because I had a lot of side trips and stuff like that. But I think it still works out to be close to 15 or 16. I think 16,000 k's in 12 days, and there's that's including all these like off-grid places. So yeah,
Mm.
he is a very special kind of like insane, but he's a great dude.
Yeah.
He's like a massive EV advocate. So
It's amazing.
another Western Australian. They're crazy over there.
Yeah. I mean, maybe just sort of summing up into the future. If you do this, say in 5 years, say you do this trip in 5 years, how do you think the network will be, and maybe what car do you think you'll be in?
So the network, I think the entire WA EV network will be completed by the end of this year. Queensland is already they're overbuilding and extending their network out some more, so that will be very nice. New South Wales is already fine. Victoria is fine. South Australia has been lagging, but they're actually finally getting some action. In fact, there's a charger that is opening today that I'll be using tomorrow that will vastly simplify my trip from Ceduna to Port Augusta at a place called Woodena. Northern Territory is the main one, which I'm a little bit worried about. Their government is kind of, well, they claim to be broke, but the NRMA, who is the New South Wales kind of based road users association, road drivers
Like our
association.
AA.
Like your AA. We have one in every state.
Yeah.
But the NRMA has got a big contract with the federal government to build stations every 150 kilometres across the entire country on all the major routes. And they have actually started in the Northern Territory with an off-grid place at a place called Earldunda, which is the first, when you're heading north out of South Australia, it's the first like roadhouse you hit. And they recently deployed basically a 2-stall 150 kilowatt solar battery with a backup generator, portable almost, but really easy to fire up quickly. Generator that will be able to handle 10 cars a day or something like that, which is roughly how many probably it's getting at this point, and it can be then extended. So my hope is that NRMA focuses on the Northern Territory first, because all the other states have kind of got their act together, but NT not so much. But yeah, I think in 5 years it'll be like driving around the United States. I'm not sure if you've ever done that before, but we drove on one day in our Model Y. We drove from Orlando to Texas, distance of about 1,900 kilometers, and we were driving at sort of 85 miles an hour, so it used a lot of power. And you look at the route that it's laid out for you, and then it reroutes because you've been using too much power, and you suddenly realize that there were three other superchargers between you and that next one. That's how it is in the US, right? They got superchargers, so many of them, thousands of the things. So we won't quite get to that stage. We won't have 48 stall superchargers or 100 stall superchargers, but I think that within 5 years, that lap will be able to be done 100% on DC charging. And that means that, if you really, really wanted to, you could do it in a week. But you'd be very tired.
Very tired.
The record in an internal combustion engine car is 5.5 days. So, that was with 4 people driving continuously. I think they stopped to fuel, and that's it. They only stopped to refuel.
Yeah.
So, we were a little bit far away from that, but we're getting close.
Yeah. Is there any sort of last sort of travel thoughts you want to share? Maybe about long distance traveling in an EV or a Tesla?
It's relaxing. Autopilot, while it does have its faults, makes driving on these long distance roads very, very easy. You spend 95% of your time or more on autopilot, and it just makes the drive more relaxing. Oh, and the other thing is, put one of these in your car. That's a Starlink terminal.
I was going to ask you about how they.
Well, this is vacuum mounted to the ceiling. That's what we're talking over at this point right now. There is no mobile network across most of Australia of any kind. And yet with Wi-Fi calling and things like that, and my Starlink dish, I've had 200, 300 megabits a second across most of this trip. The only exceptions being, ironically, far southwest of WA and the far southeast of Victoria, because the trees there are really big and the crowns join above it, and you have a narrow strip of sky above you, and the satellites are not very, very reachable, so it becomes a little bit poor. But communications, like from a Starlink dish, make massive. You're so much more relaxed. And if you are forced to charge for 3 hours, well, you can watch YouTube videos, or the Adrian's EV Quest podcast, for example.
Like, subscribe, share. Yeah, like, subscribe, share.
Yes, which is on TuneIn in your Tesla.
Yes.
You hit TuneIn, and there it is. So do it.
Fantastic. That's a good spot to finish on. So thanks, Richard, and safe travels for the rest of your long trip.
Thank you very much. Thank you.